Hello, good night. Welcome to Legalize this first day of March 2026. Before we get into tonight's program, I just want to once again thank those who are sponsoring this program and who week after week allow us to come on, namely Jail Professional Solutions Inc., Gem FM carrying this program on FM radio out of Canada, and also Grenada Technical Allied Workers Union, GTAW. On 13 February, reports emerged that a vessel was destroyed in the waters of St. Vincent and Grenadines during an operation involving the United States military. At least 3 persons were reportedly killed. Since then, there have been allegations of additional strikes. Tonight, we step back from rumor and rhetoric and ask sober questions, including sober legal questions. What exactly happened? In whose waters did it occur? Was this a law enforcement operation or a military action? Under what legal authority was it carried out? International law is clear that the use of force in the territory or territorial waters of another sovereign state is tightly regulated. United Nations Charter prohibits the use of force except in very limited circumstances. Consent, self-defense, or Security Council authorization form the basis for such action. So if consent was given by the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, what form did that consent take? Was it transparent? Was it constitutionally authorized? And if consent was not given, what are the implications? There is also a deeper question. In the Caribbean, we have long cooperated with larger powers in counter narcotics operations. But cooperation is not the same as normalization of foreign military strikes in our waters. If this becomes accepted practice, what precedent are we setting? Not just for St. Vincent and Grenadines, but for Grenada, for St. Lucia, for CARICOM, and for all small island states. Yes, security matters. Crime matters. But sovereignty matters too. The rule of law also matters. Tonight, Vincentian Attorney and social and political commentator Jomo Thomas joins us to examine the facts, the legal framework, and wider issues. Good night, Brother Jomo.
Good night. Good night to you. Thank you so much for inviting me yet again to be on this very important program, Legalize. I truly enjoy coming on, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here again this evening.
So, Jomo, I don't know if you can just tell us, as far as you know, just what happened. Because there has not been much coverage and much traction regarding this issue, quite surprisingly so. So we've just been hearing that. We've heard that there was a strike. We hear cocaine is floating all over St. Vincent. Cocaine is floating in St. Lucian waters. We hear all of this, but we just don't know if that's rumor, if that's true. So what exactly happened, as far as you know?
I think the only persons who really know what happened is the U.S. military. What we do know is that on February 13th, there was a military strike on a vessel just off in the St. Vincent Economic Zone, in St. Vincent territorial waters, just off Oya, which is a northeastern village in St. Vincent. And we know that St. Lucia is immediately to the north of us. So this strike took place just off Oya, but between St. Vincent and St. Lucia. There has been some talk that there might have been another strike off Canawan, which is Canawan is a Grenadine island between St. Vincent and Grenada. But there has been nothing in the public domain which actually verified the truth or falsity of the strike of Canawan. We have seen the remnants of the ship that was destroyed off in the to the north of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to the north of Ovia. And that's why I said that only the Americans would know in a real sense what happened. Because after the strike, our Minister of National Security, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister Sinclair Leacock, said that there was a strike, that there was a major hit, that this vessel had upwards of 500 million US dollars in cargo, cocaine, and that there was a lot of cocaine washing up on the beaches in St. Vincent. For one thing, I don't know, and Vincentians have not seen any major catchment of drugs. We have heard an announcement, and I remember putting up a Facebook page last week. Well, where did this story come from? Where did the Minister of National Security got the notion that it was $500 million worth? What is the metric used for determining that it was 1 million, 100 million, or 500 million? Because we really have not seen. I can tell you that all we have seen came out of an arrest where the police arrested 2 men, one of whom is a client of mine, for possession of 22 pounds of cocaine, which is about 9 kilos. The Deputy Prime Minister a few days ago expressed dissatisfaction that 2 weeks after the strike, St. Vincent and the Grenadines had not heard anything from the American military authorities as to what really happened. We do know, or we have heard, that 3 persons died. We don't know if any of those 3 persons are Vincentians, because there's nothing in the public domain which said one of these persons were Vincentians. But significantly, for those persons who had a chance to listen to Mr. Trump's State of the Union address, people may recall that he rather boastfully said that this strike has caused fishermen across the region to be leery, I'm paraphrasing him, about going into the waters. I also remember when the story first came out, I made a post on Facebook which says, is this an American false flag event? As if to say that we have had about 40 attacks since about September, October of last year. We have had about 100 persons killed, Trinidadians, Venezuelans, Colombians, and heaven knows who else, either in the Caribbean Sea or in the Pacific, under the pretext, the American pretext, that they are fighting narcotics trafficking. Up until now, I have not seen, and I don't know if you saw, anything in the newspapers which said that we found drugs floating in the seas. But immediately after this story, it was said that drugs were washing up on the shores. There has not been any press releases from the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I have not seen any from St. Lucia, which says, well, look, we have so far collected 40 kilos, 100 kilos, 200 kilos. As I said, I represent one of the two men who were arrested a few days ago, last week, Monday, 2 Mondays ago. And they were arrested for having in their possession 22 pounds, which is just about 9.
And is it been alleged that those 22 pounds were from that boat?
Well, that's what it's interesting, because when we appeared in court, there was a back and forth between one of the attorneys and the prosecutor. Because when the prosecutor first appeared in court, he did allude to the fact that there was this military strike by the US and these drugs may have come from that strike. When I appeared for my client, the story that was scrubbed from the facts, which caused me to withdraw my client's guilty plea, because my client had pled guilty to possession. But because that was scrubbed from the facts, we withdrew. And the magistrate, in his wisdom, said he was okay, he was agreeing that the guilty plea would be withdrawn, and that he made the point that what needs to happen is that when we go to court, there should be a request for voir dire, because my client also alleged that he was badly beaten by the police. And there's some evidence of that. We have photographs of his skin. He's a dark man about my complexion, but a week after, he still had marks on his body, which evidence that he might have been badly beaten by the police to get the statement which they got from him, which led to the discovery of the 22 pounds of
I saw something somewhere in one of these media houses stated that the Deputy Prime Minister, I think they said, has announced that there will be an amnesty for anyone who, is that correct? Anyone who surrendered.
Yeah. The Deputy Prime Minister of National Security, Sinclair Leacock, did announce an amnesty. Says any fisherman, anyone on the waters who see these drugs, take it, bring it into the authorities, and there would be an amnesty rather than trying to go and sell it someplace. So the hope is that that amnesty would stand and we would see where that leads. But so far, the only 2 persons have been arrested for being in possession with any kind of drugs, which allegedly came from that military strike by the US. Quite frankly, I don't believe the story that these drugs was on the boat off St. Lucia, because I've not seen any evidence of any proliferation of drugs. I think that the US wanted cover for all of these boats that they destroyed, and to say that there's some evidence that here, look, we have $500 million worth. But evidently, you could not have. Some people in the know said that to have $5 million worth of cocaine, the way they block it, would take like about a 20-foot or 40-foot container filled with kilograms of cocaine. The boat that we saw was a very, very small vessel, and evidently could not have held that amount of cocaine. That's just my cynicism. I could be wrong.
You spoke about you spoke about a false flag.
Yes.
First of all, just explain the concept of false flag, and then.
Right. Well, a false flag event is where some state actor would do something that give justification for something else that they are doing. As I said, since September of last year, the US has had military actions against upwards of 30 vessels. About 100 persons, upwards of 100 persons have been killed. And this most recent event which occurred on February 13th. I think that event and the way it played out was intended to give cover for whatever the US was doing. Amazingly, though, and interestingly for listeners, nothing that the US has done so far is justified in the killing of these people. Except for a few countries in the world, and the United States is not one of them, you do not get a death penalty for drug trafficking or drug possession.
Okay, I want to come on to that, but the false flag idea, I just want us to drill or investigate that a bit.
Yes.
One could understand the false flag idea, false flag concept
Yes.
prior to January 2nd or 3rd, whichever it was,
Yes.
namely when they were carrying out actions against Venezuela. Yeah?
Yes.
But what will they want to justify now? And in particular, justify this area here that will cause them or necessitate them engaging in a false flag event.
Well, I think what justifies it is up until now, I haven't, like I said, a number of vessels have been struck, but there has not been any evidence in the public domain which says that these vessels had drugs on it. In this case, you had a strike, and almost immediately you had our Deputy Prime Minister and our Minister of National Security saying that this strike might have involved as much drugs to amount to 500 million US. So that gives cover for the US saying that there are all of these vessels which are traveling through the Caribbean, trafficking in drugs and carrying drugs up north. Because remember, now if you get to St. Vincent, you actually pass Trinidad, you pass Grenada, you pass St. Vincent because you're in the north of St. Vincent now going up. And I don't think there's anything that indicates, because if all of these, they were drug shipments before, and the US wanted to prove that, look, these vessels had that. They have precision explosives that could have destroyed and disabled those boats, even kill the occupants of the boats, and still show that, here, look, here's the evidence. There's all of these drugs on the boat. That has not happened since then, since September of last year. And even now, with the the attack of St. Vincent, there's no clear proof that what our Minister of National Security said about 500 million US worth, there's no clear proof, there's no evidence of it. And one that is an open talk here in St. Vincent. What is the origin of the statement that there was about $500 million worth of drugs?
And the speculation is, what is the origin?
Yeah.
What's the speculation as to the origin?
Where did that value come from? Where did that value come from? Because that connotes a tremendous amount of drugs.
Okay. Now, some decades ago, the Caribbean signed off on an agreement with the US.
Yes.
Popularly
what are we
called
talking about? Shipwriters?
The Shipwriters Agreement.
Yeah.
What's the relevance of that agreement in this context?
Well, you know, the Shipwriters Agreement was signed in 1996 between the US and a number of countries in the region. There were two exceptions. The Jamaicans and the Barbadians took exception and did not sign on the ground that it was an affront to their sovereignty and the notion of reciprocity, because they didn't have the same understanding that they could move into the United States and do what they want to do. Essentially, the Shipwriters Agreement is a maritime agreement. It allows US DEA, Navy forces to come into your country, to these countries, under the pretext that they are helping, but they had vast powers to come in and do whatever they want. They can take people, they can take other things from these countries. And I guess it goes back to the old notion, which was first presented by Thucydides, that the powerful do what they want and the weak endure what they must. So most of these countries, including St. Vincent, signed on, but Jamaica and Barbados did not. Although we saw, if you remember, with the what's the guy there?
Dudos.
Dudos. What is his name? Where the US
Dudos
went
Pope.
in. Yeah. Essentially coordinated with Jamaican authorities, went in and took him.
Yeah. And so can the US argue that's the legal basis for these actions?
Well, in light of the shipwrights agreement, they may argue, they may think that they have carte blanche to do whatever they want, whenever they want, because these countries signed on 3 decades ago to such an agreement. And like I said, I was struck and I was quite pleased where I saw our Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of National Security, expressing frustration, at least, that 2 weeks after the event, they had no communications with the US on what actually happened and what prompted it. Although, as I said, there was this whole idea that where he came up with the $500 million worth.
But shipwrights notwithstanding, wouldn't other principles apply? For example, due process. I think you were going in that direction a while ago. Proportionality and all of those. Wouldn't those concepts?
Oh, certainly. I mean, the notion that a country can have these military strikes that destroys a ship, destroys all of the human beings on that ship, is a clear violation of the fundamental constitutional right to life. As I alluded to before, there are only a few countries in this world where you can get a death penalty for drug trafficking, and the United States is not one. Some of the biggest drug dealers, El Chapo, the guy from Colombia, his name eludes me now. All of them were arrested and detained in the United States, tried and sentenced to heavy prison terms. But here you have this new strategy by this Trump regime, which is essentially amounting to extrajudicial killings, where the United States have arrogated to itself judge, jury, executioner, in clear violation of all legal norms, clear violation of international law, clear violation of even the law of the sea, where you don't act in a kind of way which seems to demonstrate that you're pirates, or that you are simply saying, well, I have the power to do what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. I mean, there are issues of territorial integrity, there are issues of non-interference in the internal affairs of states, the respect for the territorial boundaries, and so on and so forth. So even where you have the shipwright agreement, as we do have between St. Vincent and the US, between St. Lucia and the US, there's this notion that you can't overreach in ways in which the US has overreached in the last 5 or 6 months.
And why do you call it overreach, though?
I think it's evident. It's overreach in the sense that you are killing people without due process. Because, and this is why I said the US has arrogated to him.
But they refer to them as terrorists. That's why I asked you why you call it overreach.
Yes, but
they refer to them as narco terrorists.
But that's an arbitrary designation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's a very, very arbitrary designation, and that's why I give the example with El Chapo and those other people, where otherwise you would say, well, boy, somebody who is a fisherman is a terrorist. Because remember, Trump in his State of the Union says, oh, he almost bragged that we have these fishermen in the region on their toes, on their queues, the P's and Q's, because of our actions which we're taking. You can't simply say, I think there's even if we look at the international architecture, which they themselves control, it is not that arbitrary to designate someone a terrorist entity. It is, I think, clearly ideological and political, but it's not that arbitrary. Otherwise, you go down a slippery slope. Someone has a different opinion and you label them a terrorist. In fact, we see that in Britain, with that organization that was declared a terrorist organization for which people faced up to 14 years in prison. Fortunately, the High Court in the UK has found that to be overreach and has struck down that application. That what is it? What is the group? Palestinian Action, I think, is the name of the group, where the British government had labeled it a terrorist organization. Fortunately, the court has pulled them back.
How do you fit into your analysis and your commentary? A comment from a U.S. Congressman, Republican, his name has just eluded me this moment, who said, listen, he said that in many cases of people arrested for drug trafficking in the U.S., many of those cases don't take off. So he said that one can assume from the start that a percentage of people who are alleged to be engaged in trying to bring drugs to the U.S. May not be engaged in that at all.
Will not what?
May not be engaged in that kind of activity at all.
Mm-hmm.
He said, secondly, that your point that in any event, the death penalty is not applicable for drug trafficking under U.S. law. But thirdly, he made the point that no one could reasonably say that there is any imminent danger that these small boats of Venezuela, of Trinidad, of St. Vincent, that they pose an imminent danger to the U.S. to justify this kind of lethal force. In other words, lethal force was completely disproportionate in the circumstances.
Absolutely.
How do you?
I think that he's absolutely. I think that he's absolutely right, because a lot of the pictures that we have seen, some of these boats that are blown out of the water are pirogues. It is very difficult for these boats to travel from the Southern Caribbean all the way up to the coastline in the US, because they don't even have the fuel to take them all that way. Then we know that the US has security arrangements with the DEA and other intelligence agencies, security pacts with Trinidad, all of the countries from Jamaica all the way down to Trinidad, down to Guyana. And if it is intended as a DEA policing operation, they could do what they have always done by entering into arrangement. We saw it some time ago with the premier of the BVI, when they organized this sting operation with Andre Foy and arrested him and tried him and sentenced him. I know he's now appealing, but that's a classic police operation where you can do sting, where you can do other kind of operation intended to interdict. But certainly to do as the US is doing, to kill people without, because there's an American jurist, former Supreme Court justice called Felix Frankfurter, who said it is better for 100 guilty men to go free than for one innocent man to lose his liberty. I think Frank Porter was absolutely right. But in this case, it is not just losing your liberty, it is losing your life. Which is, I mean, take for example the case of the Trinidadians who survived one of those strikes. And I think there are attorneys either in Trinidad or in the US that is now suing the US administration for the injuries which those men may have suffered. Note that even when the US claimed that these men were engaging in drug trafficking, there was no attempt, at least I have not heard anything in the public domain, which said there was any attempt to arrest, to charge, and to try these men. And as a consequence of that, lawyers have taken up their case and have brought cases in the US to try to see if they can get compensation for the injuries which they suffered.
And that takes us to a question that John Kelly is asking in the comments there. Can someone take the United States government to court for the killing of those fishermen?
Well, the Trinidadian example proves that they can. There's nothing that stops it from happening. Maybe there are wrongful death claims you can make, there are personal injury claims you can make, there are property damage claims that you can make.
Yeah, I must say, Jomo, I'm still not satisfied with the false flag explanation. In that, I'm wondering what it is that they are seeking to justify outside of a drug operation. What else they seeking to justify? So I have asked, and I will ask you now.
Yeah.
Can it be just a case of the US under the present administration decided to pursue efforts to stem the drug trade, and basically to do it in a manner that completely disregard any legal restraint and any legal restrictions. For want of a better word, they'll do it in a cowboy manner. Yes. And there will be cases where they are wrong, but then they seek to justify it. But this is really what is happening there is, and I'm leaving out Venezuela from it. I'm talking about
understand.
The continuation of these activities, because I find it hard to believe that, notwithstanding what President Trump said, that they will be seeking to deliberately disrupt and to destroy our economies by destroying the fishing economy of St. Vincent, of Grenada, of St. Lucia. If it was Cuba or Venezuela prior to January 3rd, I may say that's the objective, but I can't understand what it is the objective now. So I'm just wondering if it is the cowboy style of fighting this drug.
Well, you may be onto something here, and I'm not going to try to beat you off that. What I would say to you is that I don't think that the mere capture of the kidnapping of President Maduro ends that story, because the US is going to circle back to the leadership in Venezuela to keep on pressuring them. And part of the things that they want to show is, even though they remove the head of what they called this group, this terrorist group that was led by President Maduro, which is really a slander on President Maduro, they want to say that even after he's removed, this drug situation continues. And therefore, we have to take strong action to stem that. And the story of St. Vincent is that if you take our security minister's word that this was a huge catch, 500 million US worth, even after remove Maduro, that was heading north. Beyond that, I think that there's also the question of might is right, which is what you alluded to, and that we would take any action, every action that helps to push our way forward. Remember, I was struck yesterday that the Prime Minister of Antigua, Prime Minister Gaston Brown, and I think this is how the US is trying to corral all of these leaders, put out a statement yesterday condemning Iran for attacking neighboring countries. It was a very long statement. But what he did not do was to condemn the people who initiated the attack on Iran. No condemnation, not even a mention of the US, not even a mention of Israel. So I think all of that is part of this whole thing. So we're going to push you here. Remember as well, when the United States issued the indictment against President Maduro, it said that there were political elements across the region that had been involved, that is involved with this drug who aided and abetted the drug transshipment. My response to that was the realm of possibility is infinite, and it is highly probable that maybe some of these people are involved. But my problem with that is that the US should have gone ahead and named the names of the persons whom it claimed to be involved, to do extradition arrangements so that those persons could be extradited to the United States and try them. Without that, it holds this cloud against all of these politicians. And that's why I said it is in that broad architecture that I raised the issue of the false flag.
Cyrus Griffith is saying that I believe that current actions by the present US administration boils down to the Monroe Doctrine, or what they call now the Monroe-Trump Doctrine. Basically, I gather them to say that, listen, this is our backyard, this is our region, and we really basically deal with matters however we see and however we wish to deal with them. And
yes.
That's what he is saying. Jomo, I just want you to indicate the impact of these actions on the fishing industry in St. Vincent and the islands surrounding it, St. Lucia, Grenada, and indeed the whole of the Caribbean, because Trinidad, as we know what happened.
Right. Well, clearly, I mean, fisher folk here have indicated their skittishness. They are concerned about going out. Many people have said, my brother-in-law is here, he and his wife, and he is what we might call a fishman. He's always going to look for fish. And the last week and a half, he tells the story. He says, look, there's little or no fish in the market because the fishermen are not going out. They're afraid. They're afraid for their lives. I remember, and when this incident first happened, the Royal St. Vincent Police Force said that this was a US operation. It must have been based on intelligence and that people should go about their business and report any suspicious activity. But how do you go about your business when the attacks are not necessarily on huge vessels? Some of the attacks are on parole that are 20, 30, 40 feet long. So the kind of pressure is on. People are afraid to go out. And as a consequence, it's having an impact. Vincent, in St. Lucia, there's clearly that impact. Fisherfolk are not going out for fear that they could be struck by an American military projectile that is intended to take their lives or to seriously maim them.
Are you satisfied with the response of our leaders in the Caribbean to these incidents? In particular, now I'm talking about the OECS leaders to this recent incident.
Well, was there a response? I can't recall hearing any serious response. What I know, as I said,
one may say that's a response in itself.
Oh, you mean silence? I mean, like I said to you, our Minister of National Security said he was dismayed that the U.S. did not seek to explain to Vincentian authorities what actually happened and what prompted from happening. But he had gone ahead and said it was 500 million in drugs. So the U.S. probably said, "But you said it already. Why do we have to come back to you to justify it?" But I think that we are seeing, and it best manifested itself at the CARICOM summit, that the Caribbean leaders are prepared to go along to get along. They are very, very concerned with aggressive Trumpian actions. Some of them may be compromised. We remember seeing people like Gaston Brown and Mia Motley and Ralph Gonzalez before he was defeated said, "Oh, if it comes to personal visa for us and our medical mission with Cuba, we will willingly give up our visa," as Marco Rubio and Trump and other State Department officials put the pressure on. All of them are backing away from that. So they seem to be, they're clearly under pressure. We know, for example, the U.S. can cut back with the visa. We saw that criminal advisory where they gave something about people traveling in Grenada. And we know that Grenada, when it comes to violent crime, is one of the safest places in the world. Grenada had what, 12 homicides last year? Whereas in St. Vincent, I think we had 40.
12 too much, but 12, yes.
Yeah, 12, too much, of course. But I'm saying, so why then would you put that advisory out? We saw a similar thing with Dominica. We saw with Antigua on the issue of the visa. And many of these people, because we did not have any kind of nationalist training, a lot of our people, if a tourist liner, if a big steamer were to show up in any of our ports, in Kingstown, in Grenada, in Bridgetown, in Kingston, saying, "Look, here's your chance to go to the United States," a lot of people would go. So those governments are responding to this visa notion. And then in addition to that, there are other pressures that the U.S. can put on. There's the remittance pressure, in much the same way that Western Union and MoneyGram can't send money home to Cubans. The same thing, if they put that pressure on the Caribbean, these countries are going to be under tremendous restraint. And consequently, many of the leaders are saying, "Look, we're not going to say anything." The best example of that, I think, when the U.S. asked the Grenadine authorities to put military assets at Maurice Bishop International, I don't think there was ever a response. At least it might have been diplomatic and it didn't get into the public domain. But as far as I remember, there's nothing in the public domain which said that the Grenadian authorities actually responded and said yes or no to that. So
there's a recent statement allegedly from the PM, which says that, well, the matter has resolved itself and it is now off the board. It's off the table.
Right. So the resolution is what? The kidnapping of President Maduro?
No, I don't think so. I think the resolution was put in Trinidad.
Oh, okay.
Not in other words, they got to put it in Tobago, sorry.
So, okay. So
in that context, he said, I don't think it's about
the Grenadian what is the word I'm looking for? The Grenadian slowness in responding said, okay, we're not going to bother with Grenada. We went to Tobago.
Well, yes, I guess that's
All right.
how we are saying it. Yeah, so in fact, Christiana Lashington said recently there was a response from Grenada PM. I think it's the same
Yeah.
thing that basically, well, people in Grenada were saying that we were saying no without saying no. But that the US got the
right,
message. That's
right.
Martin Phoenix says that, and I'm glad he raised it because I want to actually take you up on that. And I'm linking it now to something the point you just made about the way they use the advisories. Martin Phoenix is saying that is a slippery slope, Jomo. I think he's speaking about you saying when they said that there were other Caribbean leaders involved. I think you said basically name them and take the appropriate action. But
Yes.
Martin Phoenix is saying that is a slippery slope, Jomo. If we give, I guess, the Trump administration this authority and credibility to call alleged collaborators, then they can use it to further victimize their opponents. As we all know, Maduro and Celia's charges were likely fabricated. What do you respond to that?
No, I am totally in agreement with that, All I'm saying, I am totally in agreement with what Martin says. My point is, when you simply put it out there and say, in the indictment where it says, up and down the Caribbean, they are collaborators. That is, for a powerful country to say that, it says to people, are you sure you want to talk forcefully? I'll give two examples. And it shows how leaders may, and even leaders who are out of power, may respond to American pressure. When on January 3rd, when President Maduro was kidnapped and taken out of Venezuela to a prison in New York, the day after, 2 days after, the former Prime Minister of St. Vincent, Ralph Gonsalves, said, asked about it, or speaking about the incident, said, I do not want to, no, he described the kidnapping of President Maduro as an American taking. And then he said, some people may expect me to get into the narrative as to whether this was about regime change or for oil, but I would not get into that. It was about a month after that he brought himself to say it was a kidnapping. Similarly, just to show how leaders are a little reticent, a little concerned, unwilling to put themselves out on the line. When PJ Patterson, in a recent initiative, issued a letter calling on former Caribbean leaders, to show solidarity with Cuba and to try to mobilize around getting generous assistance, humanitarian assistance for Cuba. Leaders from former prime ministers, Patterson, Golden, Edison James, Keith Rowley,
Kenny Anthony,
Tillman
Thomas,
Donald Ramota,
Tillman Thomas,
and conspicuously absent for me.
But Tillman Thomas also from Grenada.
Tillman Thomas from Grenada. Conspicuously absent was the former Prime Minister of St. Vincent, who was the longest serving continuous Prime Minister in the region, who had only been removed. I thought that one of the persons that PJ Patterson would have called on almost immediately was him, and I was absolutely blown away when I did not see his name on the letter. I heard him saying last Wednesday that he has joined the letter, but I always wondered why his name was not. So those are the kind of pressures I think that leaders or prominent politicians in the region are facing.
Is it possible that former prime ministers who are still active were not originally approached? Because Keith Mitchell's name is not there also.
That's possible. That's possible.
So I don't know. I'm only asking.
I mean, the realm of possibilities are infinite, but you know that Prime Minister our former prime minister was close to the Bolivarian Revolution, at least close to the leadership, close, very, very close to Cuba. And I was just struck on those two occasions where he had to talk about international law. There was that kind of reticence, there was that kind of unwillingness to speak to it. And I think that's the kind of pressures. And that is in responding to Martin's point about it's a slippery slope. Yes, it's easily slope, because I am absolutely convinced that the charges against President Maduro are fabricated. There's no reason why the president of a country who is sitting on the largest oil reserve in the world, knowing that he's a revolutionary, knowing that he's under the crosshairs of the US, the most powerful country in the world, would put himself in the kind of jeopardy that the US are trying to say that he was involved with. But
some people have also commented on the contrast with the former president of the Dominican Republic. Yes, the Dominican Republic, the one who was convicted.
Noriega?
No.
I'm sorry. Dominican Republic? Which one is that? Is Honduras you're talking about here?
No, he was convicted and he was given 45 years in prison and pardoned.
No, that's Hernandez from Honduras.
Honduras, sorry, I said Honduras, yes.
Yeah,
so some people have joined that contrast. I contrasted that with the way Maduro has been treated, and also the float, just putting it out there that other Caribbean leaders. I think that's what the point Martin is making.
Yeah. There's the clear danger there. But
and there's always the danger. There's always the danger that this could be used as a political tool.
Yes, but that's the way these guys operate. They would say anything and everything.
How do you respond to that letter from the former leaders of the Caribbean? Has it given you any hope or in any way mitigated some of the
I am glad that their voices are out there, but I am not so sure that those voices impacted on our current crop of leaders who are at the CARICOM summit. I mean, I was amazed that someone like Prime Minister Holness could talk about the Cuban contribution in education, in health. And he's talking about the Cuban people. And there's a need for free enterprise and so on and so forth. And we have to be concerned about the rule of law. And prominent in that hall were people in representing rich Arab countries that we know are dictatorships. They don't have elections. They don't have freedom of anything. The Saudis, Jamal Khashoggi, he went into the Saudi embassy in Turkey and never came out. And the story is that they chopped him up and killed him. And they're sitting there with these guys who are able to essentially buy their presence with money. But they sat there in condemnation because, in my estimation, Cuba at that CARICOM summit was on trial. So I don't put a lot of, I'm glad those leaders came out, because the historical record would show that some people spoke. And that's key for our young people and our historians of the future. But that did not seem to resonate at that CARICOM summit.
Did you see the response from one of the U.S. congressmen?
From Kamala Prasad Bisesa?
No, not Kamala. There was a U.S. congressman from Florida. His response to Holness.
No, I did not.
Okay, basically, he was issuing threats against Jamaica and against Holness for that.
Right. I did see that. Yes, I did see that, which was kind of funny, because those guys
In other words,
recognize the
he
they recognize the
obviously,
humanitarian crisis, but they didn't say they would do anything to solve the humanitarian crisis.
yeah. So he read it. I take it as a defense of Cuba.
Yes,
which takes me to Jerry Edward's point here now. His comment: refusal to coordinate your foreign policy with progressives in the USA, to engage your senior diaspora members, pursuing a mendicant foreign policy yields the current results. So he is saying that there are allies out there, there are people, there are ways we can push back, but we are basically we have decided to line up.
Yes, they have. Jerry's right. It's really unfortunate because, you know, we have not always been like this. We have had situations in the history of CARICOM where we took principled positions in difficult situations. We know the giant positions of people like Eric Williams and Michael Manley and Fobbs Bonham and Errol Barrow when they took the decision in 1971, 1972 to break the American embargo against Cuba. In fact, I wrote a column this week called CARICOM, Cuba, and West Berlin. I don't know if people remember West Berlin. But remember, West Berlin was there in the center of East Germany, in socialist East Germany. And the West wanted to make West Berlin a capitalist showcase, airlifted things after the Soviets built the Berlin Wall. And my position is that if Caribbean people have any kind of gratitude at all, they would use Jamaica as the staging port, which Jamaica is 50, 75 miles away from Cuba. Get government support, civil society support, general population support, understanding what the Cubans have done, and just ship it across the ocean. But I'm not so sure the Jamaicans are up to that, because 2-3 weeks ago, a Cuban ship went into Jamaica, the Cuban government trying to buy LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, and it left Jamaica empty. The Jamaican government refused to authorize the sale of that LPG to the Cuban authorities. So that's the difficulty that we have, and that's really unfortunate.
But would you say is a lack of gratitude or a presence of the kind of
pressure
that Jerry's
pressure.
Yeah.
Pressure. But look, there are examples where you can do other thing, right? The Mexicans are not selling the oil in the previous contracts, but they say, look, we will do some kind of humanitarian assistance. The Canadians are not selling the oil, but they're saying, continue the historical recognition of the Cuban process even after the revolution in 1959, that they're sending some form of humanitarian assistance. CARICOM could do the same, and I think it's a monumental feeling of our current crop of leaders that they could not even think that. You know, imagine when we have a national disaster, like we had the volcanic eruption, we had Hurricane Beryl. What happened? People from all over sent things for us. What the economic strangulation of Cuba is probably worse than a Category 5 hurricane. So how couldn't we not see the need to send and crouch it like that and point to what Mexico is doing, point to what Canada is doing, point to what there's a caravan coming down across the United States to send humanitarian assistance to Cuba. Even the US says that, look, we have sent $9 million in humanitarian assistance. They're sending it to churches and so on. Even if we were to say we would send all of these things in, we'd send rice, we'd send sugar, we'd send milk, we'd send, and say, let the churches do it. But to not do anything is an affront.
Yes. Your focus has been on the governments. What's about the non-governmental sector? I mean, people as yourself and other non-governmental
yes
actors, advocates, organizers. Have you been, what's your reaction or what's your commentary regarding the responses from the non-governmental progressive sector in the Caribbean?
Well, my focus in the government.
Do they have the capacity to do anything realistically?
My focus on the government is that leaders must lead. That's one. And in my column, I did make the point that non-governmental organizations, community organizations, individuals should contribute to this humanitarian effort. We have more information now, Ewart Lane, but we have less knowledge. We have gone through over the last 40 years a process where individualism has come to predominate our thought, our ideas, our being. So it's what I can get. My visa to the United. I saw somebody said today, be careful by saying anything about what's happening in Iran, because those guys have the capacity to pull all of these names into a pool, and maybe next year you may apply for a visa to the US and you may get turned down. And it's an important point. So civil society organizations are not as strong as they used to be. In fact, in St. Vincent, we had a very vibrant civil society, and that has been killed off. It died off in the last 15, 20 years, 25 years. So for example, I always give the example. In my youthful days, when we were involved in youth organization, when I used to lead Vanguard Youth, in those days, if a dog died on the street, an elder would say, "What, Jomo, get a piece of paper, hold the dog's by legs and throw it in the bush or throw it in the river." Now, because of the destruction of civil society and that kind of civic community consciousness, that dog would be shredded by vehicles passing the street, and nobody would move it. That's where that's where we have become. That's where we are now.
For example, in addition to Jomo's point, I pursuant to what I raised immediately before. Now, you have hundreds, maybe thousands of people across the Caribbean, the OECS, Jamaica, Barbados, certainly Guyana, those countries, they are now many probably in the mature stage of their lives, some in leading positions, who actually studied in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Have you commented on the efforts, if at all, of this community, because it's a community, in terms of doing the kind of things you speak of? Because you use the term gratitude, which is a very strong term. But to the kind of things you speak of, have you commented at all, or what would be your comment in terms of what they can do? And I'm not going to say it's a matter of ingratitude. I don't know if it's a matter of lack of organization, lack of vision, lack of imagination, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ingratitude may be a strong word, but I think in some respects it's an appropriate term. I have, for years, decades, been involved with the St. Vincent Cuba Friendship Society. And we have tried to organize a number of events. I am sure we have scores of persons in St. Vincent who studied and benefit from the Cuban socialist education system. And you would hold events, and if you get 2 handful, you get a lot. It may be that the outreach is not sufficient, but I know of many persons who have studied, who come into contact with information having to do with solidarity with Cuba, and who do not put themselves out there or make the effort. Take the fact that dozens of Cubans security personnel were killed in the American assault on Venezuela on January 3rd. The Cuban embassy here had a book where people can sign to express their sympathy, their sadness, their solidarity with Cuba. I don't think 150 persons went to the Cuban embassy to sign that book. And I am not so sure how many of the persons who actually went and signed were Cuban graduates. Like I said, maybe they don't know. Maybe personalized approach should have been made to them to try to see if you can get them to go. The Cuban embassy is not in the center of Kingston where a lot of people work. So I give all of that. But still, I don't think, and the funny thing is that there was a time when governments across the region, I know our government here in St. Vincent, when people were coming back from studying in Cuba, said that one of the reasons why they didn't want them to come back is that they were indoctrinated in communism and they come in and subvert the system. But evidently, that has not happened.
Okay, so let me just take one last comment from Martin Felix. He says, even Guyana,
yes,
who Cuba has helped as the Cuban Revolution exists, seems to be joining the Rubio-Trump aggression. Ali and KPB, I guess that's Baguio, are meeting with Rubio this coming week. What are regional progressives doing to make our voices heard? Okay, but we'll have a conversation on Cuba, but I just had to bring it into the context of what our elders, our retired leaders have so admirably done, in my view. And I was so happy to see leaders from as far as Jamaica in the north to Trinidad in the south, including our own former Prime Minister in Grenada, Tillman.
Well, actually, remember that Donald Ramota signed on.
Oh, Dr. Guyana in the south, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so happy to see also
yes,
former Prime
too.
Minister Grenada sign on. So, but I just want to invite you to make a final comment on the issue that we actually discussed tonight, namely that incident that took place and the context and the implications. And if you have any concern that the muted response, both from our leaders and from our citizens, if you have any concern that it could seem as though we are just accepting this as normal conduct, and in that context, likely to see other incidents of this type.
Yes, I am very concerned. I think that clearly we are shocked and awed by the American aggressive posture, and we are evidently afraid to say or do anything because of the power of the United States and because of what we see the US can do and has done. We saw it in Venezuela with the kidnapping of President Maduro. We see it with these lethal military strikes where the US is judge, jury, and executioner. We see it now with the Western collaboration in the assault against Iran. I saw just today where England, Germany, and France have said that they're going to join the US in defending against Iranian aggression. So people are evidently very concerned and they're kind of overwhelmed. But in my column this week, I pointed to a quote from a man who writes as Simplicius He's actually Patrick Lawrence, one of my favorite American independent journalists. And Patrick Lawrence says, the decision with those who take the doings of Trump regime as anything more than an edifice built on lies and illusion. He said, illusion, I'll read it again. Illusion lies with those who take the doings of the Trump regime as anything more than an edifice built on lies and illusions. It represents an inherently unstable interim, not an era. I think that's a powerful statement that says where we are. In other words, you appear to be all powerful and almighty, but the movements, your actions are, say, is this not the raging actions of a tiger who is wounded and is fighting back? Because where we have to look for the changes in the international arena is not so much in the military power. And I think that's why Trump is saying, look, we want to give the military another $500 billion. It's in the economic realignments which are taking place. The fact that BRICS has emerged, the fact that BRICS now control 40%, the nations, 40% of the real economic activity taking place in the world. The fact that the US has only attempted to use brute force, pressure, sanctions to get its way. It has abandoned the role of soft power and is now overwhelmingly reliant on bullying military tactics. I think that's where we have to look. And I am actually very confident that there's going to be a realignment, and it's going to be a realignment. Well, my only caveat is, now, if these guys were to have moved against Iran, as I said in my column this week, the crosshairs, if they're successful there, would be on Russia and China. But that is going to be a different ball game, because the whole concept of MAD, mutually assured destruction, looms large. Same thing if they try to move against North Korea. But I think that it is in the economic sphere that we need to look at some of the changes. And I really believe a realignment is coming. And hopefully we can get past this wanton disregard of the international legal architecture. In fact, something instructive happened at Davos, where the Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Carney, said that the rule-based international order does not really apply to us, or it was not properly applied across the board, that we had certain rules which we work from, and the rest of the world, predominantly the global south, had to. So those are all the things that we have to take into consideration when we look at it. But people's eyes are opening. It's open. It's clearly opened with the genocide in Gaza. I think it's opening Caribbean people's eyes with some of these strikes we're seeing across the region. So it's a slow process, but unless these guys miscalculate and destroy the world, I think that we are in for, it's a good time to be alive. Dangerous time, but a good time to be alive.
Okay, Jomo, as my father would say, time will tell.
Time will tell.
Time will tell.
Time will always tell.
Thank you so much for coming on, and this is a conversation that requires having. And I hope this conversation will continue.
Definitely.
We have to be patient and optimistic, Martin Felix says. We have to be courageous also.
I agree.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for those who viewed the program. Thank you once more to the sponsors.
Thank you for having me on yet again.
Thank you to Jail Professional Solutions, Inc. Thank you to GTAO. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, John. Calise carrying the program on FM out of Canada. Thank you all for viewing. Good night and see you next week.
Until we meet again.
Till we meet again.